Eleanor Mitchell steered her aging Subaru into the parking lot of Skyward Aviation Academy. Her eyes lingered on the sleek sports cars and luxury SUVs that seemed to mock her practical 15-year-old vehicle. At 68, her hands were weathered, but steady, marked with the lines of someone who had devoted her life to the sky. She had driven 2 hours from her modest lakeside cottage to this prestigious flight school after receiving a surprise invitation to her granddaughter's graduation ceremony. "Just come watch, Grandma," Sophia had said. "Dad got me into the advanced tactical program. You don't have to fly or anything." Eleanor smiled at the memory as she grabbed her worn leather flight bag from the passenger seat. Inside was a carefully wrapped gift for Sophia alongside something else. Her old pilot logbook, filled with entries dating back to 1978, meticulously maintained despite its age. She hadn't shown it to anyone in nearly a decade, but something had compelled her to bring it today. Perhaps it was nostalgia, or perhaps it was the subtle condescension in her son-in-law, Martin's voice when he had called to make sure she knew how to find the place. Skyward Aviation Academy stood like a gleaming testament to modern flight technology. The campus featured a main building of glass and steel, flanked by several hangars and a private runway where sleek training aircraft were lined up like soldiers. As Eleanor pushed through the heavy glass doors, the cool air conditioning hit her face along with the unmistakable scent of aircraft fuel and expensive cologne. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair and a crisp uniform, looked up from her tablet. "Can I help you?" she asked, her eyes briefly taking in Eleanor's simple clothes and weathered appearance. "I'm here for Sophia Mitchell's graduation ceremony," Eleanor replied, adjusting the strap of her flight bag. "Oh, right, the Mitchell party." The receptionist checked her tablet. "They're gathered at Hangar 3 for the pre-flight demonstrations." She handed Eleanor a visitor's badge. "Just so you know, only certified pilots and enrolled students can access the aircraft or simulators." Eleanor nodded politely, clipping the badge to her cardigan as she made her way through the immaculate lobby. Display cases showcased model aircraft and trophies won by the Academy's teams. Framed photographs of famous pilots and aviation pioneers lined the walls, alongside images of celebrities and politicians posing next to expensive private jets. Everything about this place screamed exclusivity, from the marble floors to the private lockers labeled with the names of prominent local figures. As she approached Hangar 3, she could see her granddaughter Sophia surrounded by her classmates, all in their early 20s, laughing and discussing the upcoming demonstration flights. Standing slightly apart was her son-in-law Martin, chest puffed out as he chatted with another middle-aged man wearing the Academy's instructor uniform. "And that's why I said you can't expect European precision with American training," Martin was saying as Eleanor approached, his companion chuckling appreciatively. "Grandma!" Sophia spotted her first, breaking into a genuine smile as she rushed over to hug Eleanor. "You made it!" "What I know is that you're making a scene at my daughter's graduation." "Your daughter," Eleanor corrected gently. "Who invited?" "Me here." Commander Wilson stepped forward, clearly wanting to defuse the situation before it escalated further. He was interrupted by the arrival of an older man in a tailored flight suit, moving with the deliberate grace of someone who commanded respect without asking for it. The insignia on his uniform was different from the others, marking him as someone important. "Is there a problem here, James?" the man asked, his voice measured. "No problem, Admiral Reynolds," Wilson replied quickly. "Just explaining our simulator protocols to a visitor." The man, evidently someone significant within the Academy hierarchy, studied Eleanor for a moment, his eyes lingering on her flight bag. "And who might this visitor be?" Before Wilson could answer, Eleanor extended her hand. "Eleanor Mitchell." Something flickered across Admiral Reynolds' face. Recognition, perhaps, but it was gone so quickly that Eleanor thought she might have imagined it. Thomas Reynolds, he replied, shaking her hand firmly. Academy director and former Navy pilot. I couldn't help overhearing. You've brought your logbook? This is absurd, Martin interjected before Eleanor could respond to Reynolds. My mother-in-law thinks she can walk in here and start using military-grade simulators when she probably hasn't been in a cockpit in 30 years. Reynolds' expression remained neutral. Is that accurate, Mrs. Mitchell? Are you unfamiliar with advanced aircraft? Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I'm very familiar with them, Admiral Reynolds. She's being stubborn, Martin insisted. Eleanor, just accept that. This isn't the place for you to play Amelia Earhart. You're embarrassing Sophia and Claire. Eleanor glanced at her granddaughter, who looked anything but embarrassed by her. Rather, she seemed increasingly uncomfortable with her father's behavior. Claire stood slightly apart, her expression caught between loyalty to her husband and concern for her mother. Perhaps a demonstration would settle matters, Reynolds suggested, surprising everyone. Mrs. Mitchell, would you care to show us your proficiency? Simulator 7 is open, he added. Wilson looked alarmed. Sir, Simulator 7 is. I'm well aware of what Simulator 7 is, Reynolds cut in smoothly. Martin snorted. This is ridiculous. She'll crash it within seconds. I'll take full responsibility, Reynolds replied, his tone making it clear the matter was settled. As they walked toward the far end of the facility, Eleanor became aware of a growing audience. Word had apparently spread that something interesting was happening, and several students and instructors had paused their activities to watch. Simulator 7, she now saw, was set distinctly apart from the others. It was housed in a separate room with advanced equipment surrounding a full-motion platform. The Reynolds Challenge, Wilson explained reluctantly when they reached it. Named after the Admiral. It simulates an advanced dogfight scenario with multiple adversaries and changing weather conditions. Our most difficult simulation. No one has achieved a perfect score this year, Reynolds added. Martin looked almost gleeful. This is perfect. Now Eleanor can see exactly how out of her depth she is. Eleanor said nothing as she carefully removed her logbook from its case once more, flipping through it to refresh her memory on certain aircraft specifications. Each movement was practiced, efficient, muscle memory from thousands of hours in the air. Mom, you don't have to do this, Claire said quietly, placing a hand on her arm. Eleanor patted her daughter's hand. Yes, I do. The crowd had grown. Larger, with whispers and quiet laughter rippling through it. Eleanor caught fragments. Poor old lady, embarrass herself. Should stop this before. Martin stood front and center, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face as Wilson explained the simulation to Eleanor in the slow, loud voice people often use with the elderly or very young children. The simulation will throw multiple bogeys at you at random intervals and vectors. You'll be flying an F-35 against a mix of 4th and 5th generation fighters. The weather will deteriorate as the simulation progresses. Do you understand? Before Eleanor could answer, one of Martin's friends called out, Better call the medic now. The G-force simulation might give her a heart attack. Laughter erupted, and something finally snapped inside Eleanor. She'd endured decades of being underestimated. First as a young woman in aviation, then as a female pilot in a male-dominated field, and now as an elderly person presumed incompetent. She had remained silent about her past out of modesty and a desire for privacy, but enough was enough. Sophia stepped forward suddenly. Stop it, all of you. Her young face was flushed with anger. You don't know who she is. Eleanor gently touched her arm. It's all right, Sophia. She turned to face the crowd, her voice clear and steady. I was a United States Air Force test pilot for 28 years. I flew over 40 different aircraft types from the F-4 Phantom to early prototypes of stealth technology. I was one of the first women to qualify for the test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base, and I later became an instructor there. I hold 3 airspeed records that still stand today. The silence that followed was absolute. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Martin's face had drained of color, while Commander Wilson looked as though he'd swallowed something unpleasant. Several of the onlookers exchanged uncertain glances, their previous amusement evaporating. Thomas Reynolds, however, smiled faintly. "I thought your name sounded familiar," he said. "You wouldn't happen to be the same Eleanor Mitchell who wrote the Advanced High-Angle Attack Maneuvers paper that became standard reading at the Naval Academy?" Eleanor nodded once, surprised. "I am. I had the honor of studying under your methodology," Reynolds said, inclining his head slightly. "It quite literally saved my life during Desert Storm." Martin, recovering from his shock, scoffed. "This is convenient. Suddenly you're some legendary test pilot no one's ever heard of." "Whether you've heard of me or not is irrelevant to my capability," Eleanor corrected calmly. Sophia was staring at her grandmother with newfound amazement. "Why? Didn't you ever tell me?" "You never asked," Eleanor replied simply. "And I've never been one to brag." Claire stepped forward, her expression a mix of pride and hurt. "Mom, I had no idea either, all these years." "It wasn't a secret," Eleanor said gently. "Just not something I discussed much after retirement." Commander Wilson cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, this is unexpected, but the Reynolds challenge is still exceptionally difficult, even for experienced pilots." "I understand," Eleanor replied, turning back to Simulator 7. "May I proceed?" Reynolds nodded. "Whenever you're ready." Eleanor took her position in the simulator cockpit. The familiar layout of instruments and controls was a comfort, even if the technology had advanced significantly since her active duty days. She regulated her breathing, a technique she had taught hundreds of times. In hold, out hold. The years fell away as she scanned the virtual displays, adjusting minutely to the simulator's configuration. A small green light indicated the system was active. The crowd went completely silent. The simulation began with a standard takeoff sequence, which Eleanor executed flawlessly. As her virtual F-35 climbed to altitude, the first enemy aircraft appeared on her radar. A standard fourth-generation fighter, approaching head-on. Eleanor tracked it smoothly, executed a perfect intercept maneuver, and dispatched it with simulated missiles. Before anyone could react, 2 more bogies appeared, these flanking her from different altitudes. Again, Eleanor adapted seamlessly, her movements economical and precise. She rolled the aircraft into a complex defensive maneuver that positioned her perfectly to neutralize both threats in rapid succession. The system accelerated, throwing increasingly difficult scenarios at her. The simulated weather deteriorated, as promised, with visibility dropping and turbulence increasing. Enemy aircraft appeared in greater numbers and with more sophisticated tactics. Eleanor adjusted to each new challenge with the calm precision of someone who had faced far worse in real life. Her virtual F-35 danced through the sky, executing maneuvers that many of the watching students had only read about in textbooks. 5 bogies, 10, 15. Not a single hit on her aircraft. Every threat neutralized with textbook precision. When the final simulated enemy was defeated and the system indicated completion, Eleanor calmly went through the proper shutdown sequence before exiting the simulator. The entire academy was silent, staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to awe. Wilson was the first to break the silence, checking the electronic scoring display with visible disbelief. 100% effectiveness, 0 damage sustained, and a new course record for completion time. Martin stood frozen, his earlier smugness replaced by stunned silence. "Grandma, that was incredible!" Sophia burst out, rushing forward. Several of her classmates followed, their previous dismissiveness forgotten in their excitement at witnessing something truly extraordinary. Eleanor carefully gathered her logbook before accepting their congratulations with quiet dignity. As The excited chatter grew around her. She caught sight of Martin slipping away toward the observation deck, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Thomas Reynolds stepped forward, extending his hand. "Colonel Mitchell, that was one of the finest displays of tactical flying I've seen in my 30 years with this academy." "Thank you," Eleanor replied simply. "I don't suppose," Reynolds continued, "you would consider offering a master class to some of our advanced students? Your expertise is clearly unparalleled." The news spread through the academy like wildfire. By the time Eleanor had secured her logbook and joined Sophia's graduation ceremony in the main auditorium, students and instructors were finding excuses to pass by, hoping to catch a glimpse of the woman who had just shattered the simulator record. Martin had sequestered himself at the reception bar, nursing a whiskey and pointedly avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Colonel Mitchell, Commander." Wilson approached, his earlier condescension replaced by obsequious respect. "Admiral Reynolds asked me to provide you with this." He handed her an envelope. "It's an honorary position on our advisory board. No obligations, full privileges." Eleanor accepted it with a nod. "Thank you." And, Wilson continued nervously, "I wanted to personally apologize for my behavior earlier. It was unprofessional and discourteous." "No, Martin. Just determined to run a safe and professional event." "Colonel Mitchell is right," Reynolds interjected. "The flight demonstrations require certified expertise. Aviation regulations." Martin looked from face to face, finding no allies. "Fine," he said tightly. "I know when I'm not wanted." He turned and stalked toward the exit, dignity in tatters. Eleanor felt no triumph in the moment, only a quiet sadness that it had come to this. But she also felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the full acknowledgement of her worth and expertise, freely given by people who recognized genuine skill when they saw it. The Aerial Veterans Charity Exhibition, as it came to be officially known, exceeded everyone's expectations. Over 500 participants, dozens of sponsors, and thousands of spectators filled the Skyward Aviation Academy and its airfield on a perfect Saturday in early autumn. Aviation celebrities made appearances, but the undeniable star of the day was Eleanor Mitchell. Dressed in a simple but professional flight suit, no designer gear, just functional attire with a small Air Force pin on her collar, Eleanor conducted 3 masterclasses throughout the day. Participants hung on her every word, many of them experienced pilots themselves who recognized the rare opportunity to learn from someone with her unique background and skill set. "Economy of movement," Eleanor explained to her rapt audience during the advanced class. "Precision isn't about speed. It's about efficiency. Eliminate variables. Control your breathing. Make every action deliberate." She demonstrated her techniques, using the Academy's advanced simulator, walking pilots through maneuvers that many had only read about in textbooks. Sophia had blossomed in her role organizing the Junior Pilots program, showing a natural talent for instruction that made Eleanor quietly proud. Claire moved through the event taking photographs and coordinating volunteers, periodically catching her mother's eye with smiles of amazement at what had unfolded from that contentious graduation day. Martin had kept his distance for most of the day, lurking at the periphery of events, his customary confidence notably diminished. Eleanor had spotted him several times watching her demonstrations from afar, his expression unreadable. At midday, the event featured a special surprise that Reynolds had arranged without telling Eleanor. 3 vintage aircraft, a restored P-51 Mustang, an F-86 Sabre, and an early model F-4 Phantom were brought to the field, each piloted by a former military aviator who had trained under Eleanor's protocols. "A tribute to your legacy," Reynolds explained as the aircraft performed the precise formation flyover that brought the crowd to its feet. The emotional highlight came when one of the pilots, now in his 60s, approached Eleanor after landing. With tears in his eyes, he explained how her test data on the 4-4's spin recovery procedures had saved his life during a mission over the Persian Gulf in 1991. I had 3 seconds to decide, he told the gathering crowd, and I heard your voice. In my head from that training session, trust the aircraft, trust the data, trust yourself. I did exactly what you taught us, and I walked away from what should have been a fatal spin. By late afternoon, as the event wound down and the charity competition reached its final rounds, Thomas Reynolds approached Eleanor with news that the fundraising goal had been not just met but quadrupled, with over $400,000 raised for veterans programs. Your masterclass alone brought in nearly $100,000, he told her. People were paying premium donations just to watch you demonstrate those advanced techniques. Eleanor was genuinely moved. I'm glad something good has come of all this attention. Something extraordinary, Reynolds corrected. And speaking of which, there's someone who'd like to speak with you before the closing ceremony. He led her to a quiet area behind the main hangar where, to her surprise, Martin was waiting. He looked different, humbled perhaps, his usual polished appearance slightly rumpled as though he hadn't slept well. I'll give you some privacy, Reynolds said, retreating tactfully. For a moment, neither Eleanor nor Martin spoke. Then Martin broke the silence, his voice lacking its usual bluster. That was quite something out there today. Thank you, Eleanor replied neutrally. Martin ran a hand through his hair. I've been watching you teach, the way people respond to you. It's not just that you know what you're talking about, though obviously you do. It's how you share that knowledge. No ego, no showing off, just clarity. Eleanor waited, sensing he had more to say. I've built my entire life around being the expert, the authority, Martin continued. In my business, with my friends, with my family. He looked away. And then you come along and effortlessly demonstrate what real expertise looks like. And it's nothing like what I've been doing. Martin, please, let me finish. I've been a pompous, insecure ass to you for years. He met her eyes directly. I'm sorry, Eleanor. Truly sorry. The apology was so unexpected that Eleanor found herself momentarily at a loss for words. Sophia deserves a father who can admit when he's wrong, Martin added. And Claire deserves a husband who's secure enough to recognize other people's strengths without feeling threatened. He hesitated. I'd like to try to be that person. I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to learn. Eleanor studied her son-in-law's face, seeing genuine regret there. Apology accepted, Martin. I don't expect things to change overnight, he said. 20 years of being a jerk can't be undone with one conversation, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. Their discussion was interrupted by Commander Wilson, who approached with obvious reluctance to intrude. Excuse me, Colonel Mitchell, but you're needed for the awards ceremony. And Mr. Mitchell, your daughter is looking for you. Something about wanting you both in the family photo. Martin looked surprised. Both of us? That's what she said, sir. As they walked back toward the main event area, Martin cleared his throat. So, I understand from Claire that you're considering Reynolds' offer to become a regular instructor here. Part-time, Eleanor confirmed. Just 1 weekend a month. It seems I still have something to contribute. You always did, Martin said quietly. I just wasn't willing to see it. The closing ceremony was brief but moving. The check presentation to the Air Force Veterans Foundation was met with enthusiastic applause, as was the announcement of the competition winners. To everyone's surprise, Sophia took second place in the advanced division, applying the fundamentals her grandmother had taught her over the past weeks. As Eleanor stood watching her granddaughter accept her award, she felt a deep sense of contentment. The skills honed over decades and nearly forgotten in retirement had found new purpose, not in military applications or test flights, but in building bridges between generations, between civilian and military worlds, between past accomplishments and future possibilities. Thomas Reynolds approached as the ceremony concluded, offering his hand. You've transformed this academy, Colonel Mitchell. Reminded us what aviation is really about: precision, discipline, humility. Eleanor smiled. Sometimes the most important lessons come from unexpected sources. Indeed, he agreed. Which reminds me, the board has unanimously voted to rename the Reynolds Challenge. From next month, it will be known as the Mitchell Tactical Exercise. Eleanor shook her head, genuinely taken aback. That's not necessary. On the contrary, Reynolds insisted. It's entirely appropriate. Your name should be associated with excellence. He glanced over at Martin, who was now engaged in animated conversation with Sophia near the awards table. And speaking of unexpected outcomes, your son-in-law approached me earlier about volunteering for the Academy's Veterans Outreach Program. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Martin did? Yes. Said something about wanting to use his business connections to help secure job placements for veterans transitioning to civilian life. Reynolds looked thoughtful. People can surprise you, can't they? They certainly can, Eleanor agreed, watching as Claire joined her husband and daughter, the three of them forming a tableau that seemed more genuine than any family portrait Martin had previously orchestrated. That evening, as the Academy staff began breaking down the event setups, Eleanor found herself alone on the now empty flight line. The facility was quiet, the earlier chaos of hundreds of participants replaced by a peaceful stillness. She gazed at the row of aircraft, their silhouettes sharp against the setting sun. One last flight? Came Sophia's voice from behind her. Eleanor turned to see her granddaughter approaching, her new competition medal hanging around her neck. Just saying goodbye to an old friend, she replied, nodding toward the vintage F-4 Phantom that had been part of the day's display. There. Taking it back to the museum tomorrow. That was your main test aircraft, wasn't it? Sophia asked. For many years, Eleanor nodded. We learned so much from that airframe. Its quirks and capabilities taught us lessons that still apply to modern fighters. Sophia nodded. That's cool, but you'll be using the modern simulators for your instructor position, right? Already scheduled, Eleanor smiled. Though I doubt they'll ever feel quite the same as the real thing. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, grandmother and granddaughter united by a newfound appreciation of their shared passion. You know, Sophia said eventually, Dad's different since that day. Not completely, he still has his moments, but it's like something shifted. He actually listens now. Sometimes people can change when they're ready to, Eleanor said. The hardest maneuver is the one that requires you to confront your own ego. Sophia grinned. Is that from your famous training manual? No, Eleanor laughed. That one's just from life. As they walked together toward the exit where Claire and Martin were waiting to drive them home, Eleanor reflected on the strange path that had led her here. One contentious graduation ceremony had somehow blossomed into renewed purpose, restored family relationships, and a platform to support the veterans she had always considered her true extended family. The next morning, as Eleanor packed her bags to return to her lakeside cottage, she found an envelope that someone had slipped under her guest room door. Inside was a handwritten note from Martin. Eleanor, I spent 20 years trying to impress people with knowledge about aviation that I didn't actually possess. You commanded respect with skill earned through decades of discipline. I've been learning the wrong lessons about what makes a person worthy of respect. Thank you for showing Sophia what real expertise looks like, and for giving me a chance to become someone my daughter can genuinely look up to, not just because I'm her father, but because I'm trying to be a better man. With respect and gratitude, Martin. Beneath the note was a gift certificate for a full weekend at a renowned tactical flying school, not as an instructor, but as a participant in their Legends of Aviation Historical Symposium, where pioneers in the field shared their experiences with the next generation. Eleanor smiled as she tucked the note into her bag. She had never sought validation or recognition. Her satisfaction had always come from the quiet knowledge of a job well done, whether testing experimental aircraft or raising her daughter. But there was something undeniably sweet about finally being seen, truly seen, for who she was and what she had accomplished. As Claire drove her to the bus station later that morning, Eleanor gazed out the window at the passing scenery, feeling a contentment she hadn't experienced in years. "You know," Claire said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I've been thinking about what you said about keeping your accomplishments private after Dad died. I understand why you did it, but I wish I'd known. I would have been so proud to tell people about my mom, the legendary test pilot." Eleanor reached over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "You never needed to be proud of what I did, Claire. I've always been proud of who you are." Claire blinked back tears. "Well, I hope you're prepared for Sophia to tell absolutely everyone about her badass grandmother. She's already talking about following in your footsteps, not necessarily the military part, but the flight instruction. She's found her calling." "There are worse legacies to leave," Eleanor said softly. At the station, as they said their goodbyes, Claire hugged her mother tightly. "Promise she'll come back for Thanksgiving. The whole family will be there, including Martin, who insists on cooking this year instead of catering." Eleanor laughed. "Now that is a transformation. He's trying," Claire said. "Really trying." As the bus pulled away from the station, Eleanor settled into her seat with a small smile. She had come to town 2 weeks ago as Sophia's grandmother and was leaving as Colonel Eleanor Mitchell, respected aviator and veteran whose name would soon grace a training program at an elite academy. But more importantly, she was leaving as a mother and grandmother whose family had finally seen her for who she truly was. The bus passed the turnoff for Skyward Aviation Academy, and Eleanor caught a glimpse of its distinctive control tower silhouetted against the morning sky. The place where she had been mocked and dismissed was now a place where her legacy would live on, not because she had sought revenge or validation, but because she had simply stood her ground and demonstrated her worth with quiet dignity. In the end, she hadn't needed to shout to be heard. She had only needed to take flight one more time, showing rather than telling, letting her actions speak with the eloquence that had always defined her life's work. 6 months after the charity event, Eleanor's life had transformed in ways she never could have anticipated. What had begun as a part-time instructional role at Skyward Aviation Academy had expanded into something far more significant. Her monthly weekend classes had become the most sought-after training sessions in the aviation community, with waiting lists stretching months into the future. The Mitchell Tactical Exercise, formerly the Reynolds Challenge, had become a benchmark for excellence that pilots from around the country sought to master. More importantly, the simulator program she had developed specifically for female pilots had attracted international attention, bringing students from as far away as Japan and Australia. "You've created something extraordinary here," Thomas Reynolds told her one afternoon as they watched a group of young women pilots working through Eleanor's specialized training program. "These women aren't just learning to fly, they're learning to believe in themselves." Eleanor nodded, watching as a young pilot named Maya, barely 22, and painfully shy when she'd first arrived 3 months ago, executed a perfect tactical maneuver in the simulator that would have challenged pilots with twice her experience. "That's the real barrier most of them face," Eleanor replied. "Not the technical aspects of flight, but the constant voice telling them they don't belong here," Reynolds smiled. "A voice you've been proving wrong your entire career." On this particular morning, Eleanor arrived at the academy to find an unusual level of activity. Staff members were bustling about, and there was a palpable energy in the air that suggested something significant was happening. Colonel Mitchell, Commander Wilson greeted her at the entrance, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "We've been trying to reach you." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "My phone's been off during my drive. Is something wrong?" "Not wrong, exactly," Wilson replied cryptically. Admiral Reynolds asked me to bring you to Hangar 1 immediately when you arrived. As they walked across the campus, Eleanor noticed additional security personnel stationed at various points, and several vehicles with government plates parked near the main administrative building. "James, what's going on?" she asked directly. Wilson hesitated. "I think the Admiral should explain." Hangar 1, the largest facility at the Academy, was typically used for major events and housing the most valuable aircraft. As they approached, Eleanor could see a small crowd gathered outside, including several people in military uniforms. Thomas Reynolds spotted her and broke away from a conversation with a tall man in an Air Force dress uniform adorned with general stars. "Eleanor, thank you for coming so quickly," Reynolds said, his usual composure slightly disrupted by evident excitement. "There's someone here who specifically requested to meet you." He gestured toward the general, who turned to face Eleanor. She recognized him immediately from news coverage, General Marcus Holloway, the current Chief of Staff of the Air Force. "Colonel Mitchell," the general said, extending his hand. "It's an honor to meet you at last." Eleanor shook his hand firmly, maintaining her composure despite her surprise. "The honor is mine, General. I wasn't aware you were visiting the Academy today." "That was intentional," he replied with a smile. "We wanted to surprise you." "May we speak privately?" Reynolds led them to a small conference room adjacent to the hangar, where they were joined by two other high-ranking officers and a civilian whom General Holloway introduced as Dr. Emily Chun, Director of Advanced Research at NASA. Once they were settled, General Holloway came directly to the point. "Colonel Mitchell, I've been following your work here at the Academy with great interest, particularly your innovations in training methodology for high-stress tactical situations." "Thank you, sir," Eleanor replied, curious about the real purpose of this meeting. "What you may not know," he continued, "is that your approaches have attracted attention at the highest levels. The data from your training programs shows a 37% improvement in pilot performance under simulated combat conditions compared to traditional methods." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "And it's not just the military applications that interest us. Your work on cognitive processing under extreme pressure has implications that extend to our space program as well." Eleanor looked from one face to another, sensing there was more to this visit than simple recognition of her training programs. "I appreciate the acknowledgement," she said carefully, "but I suspect you didn't bring this level of brass to tell me something that could have been communicated in an email." General Holloway laughed, direct as always. "You're right, of course." His expression became more serious. "Colonel Mitchell, we're here to offer you a position of significant national importance." Over the next hour, they outlined a proposal that left Eleanor speechless. The Department of Defense, in conjunction with NASA, was establishing a new joint training initiative focused on preparing both military pilots and astronauts for next-generation aircraft and spacecraft. They wanted Eleanor to develop and lead the program. "Your experience as both a test pilot and an instructor makes you uniquely qualified," Dr. Chun explained. "The psychological aspects of your training methods, the way you address fear, and decision-making under pressure are exactly what we need for pilots who will be working at the edge of our technological capabilities." "This is unexpected," Eleanor said when they had finished. "I'm 70 years old. Not exactly the typical age for starting a new government program." "Age is precisely why we want you," General Holloway countered. "Your experience can't be replicated or replaced. We need someone who has lived through the evolution of modern aviation, who understands both the human and technical elements at a fundamental level." The program would be based primarily at Edwards Air Force Base, Reynolds added, but with significant components here at the Academy as well. "We would effectively become a civilian extension of the initiative." Eleanor took a moment to process this information. 6 months ago, she had been a retired pilot living quietly by a lake, her expertise all but forgotten. Now she was being offered the opportunity to shape the future of aviation and space training at the highest level. "I'll need some time to consider this," she said finally. "Of course," General Holloway nodded. "But before you decide, there's something else we'd like to show you." They escorted her into Hangar 1, which had been cleared of its usual aircraft and personnel. In the center stood a sleek, unfamiliar aircraft covered partially by a tarp. Its visible portions revealed lines unlike anything Eleanor had seen before, a synthesis of stealth, technology, and aerodynamic principles that suggested capabilities far beyond current fighter jets. "This is the X-99 Peregrine," General Holloway said, his voice lowered despite the secure environment. "A hypersonic tactical aircraft currently in the final stages of development. It incorporates several principles you theorized in your papers on high-altitude maneuverability back in the 1990s. Eleanor walked slowly around the aircraft, her trained eye taking in details that would have been meaningless to most observers, but spoke volumes to her about the craft's capabilities. "You built it," she said softly, recognizing elements of design she had proposed decades ago, but that had been deemed too advanced for the technology of the time. "We built it," Dr. Chun corrected, "based significantly on your work. The Peregrine can sustain Mach 7 at altitude and execute maneuvers that would be impossible for any other aircraft." General Holloway stepped closer. "The first test pilots will begin training in 3 months. We want you to design and oversee that training program. These pilots will be facing challenges no one has ever encountered before. They need someone who understands not just how to fly at the edge of the envelope, but how to think there." Eleanor placed her hand on the aircraft's surface, feeling a connection to this machine that represented the culmination of principles she had helped pioneer throughout her career. "Why reveal this to me before I've accepted the position?" she asked. "Because we wanted you to understand what's at stake," General Holloway replied. "This isn't just another training program. It's about preparing a new generation for frontiers. We've only begun to explore," Dr. Chun smiled. "And because we thought seeing your theories manifested in physical form might be persuasive," Eleanor couldn't help but smile in return. "It is that." As they exited the hangar, Eleanor noticed her granddaughter Sophia standing with a group of academy instructors at a respectful distance, trying not to appear too curious about the high-profile visitors. General Holloway followed her gaze. "Your granddaughter, I believe. Admiral Reynolds speaks very highly of her potential." "She has good instincts," Eleanor acknowledged, pride evident in her voice despite her attempt at professional detachment. "Talent often runs in families," the general observed. "Perhaps she might find opportunities in our program as well once it's established." The implications of that statement weren't lost on Eleanor. This wasn't just an opportunity for her, it could potentially open doors for Sophia that would otherwise remain closed. "I'll give you my answer within the week," Eleanor promised as they concluded their meeting. "There are family matters I need to consider." That evening, Eleanor sat on the porch of her lake house, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson. Her mind was still processing the day's events, weighing possibilities that she had never imagined would be available to her at this stage of life. The sound of tires on gravel announced visitors, and moments later, Claire's car pulled up with Sophia in the passenger seat. Eleanor had called them after leaving the academy, asking if they could stop by but offering no explanation. "Mom, what's going on?" Claire asked as they settled on the porch, concern evident in her voice. "You sounded strange on the phone." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I received an unusual offer today." She outlined the proposal, watching their expressions shift from curiosity to astonishment as they grasped the significance of what she was describing. "Grandma, that's incredible!" Sophia exclaimed when Eleanor had finished. "You have to take it." Claire was more measured, concern creasing her brow. "It sounds demanding." Are you sure you want to take on something so intensive at this point in your life? That's what I've been asking myself, Eleanor admitted. It would mean relocating to California for at least part of the year, completely restructuring my life. But it's the opportunity of a lifetime, Sophia insisted. Eleanor smiled at her granddaughter's enthusiasm. For someone your age, perhaps. For me, it's more complicated. Because of Martin? Claire asked quietly. Eleanor shook her head. No, surprisingly, that's not a major factor. Martin and I have reached a kind of peace these past months. She paused, considering how to express her deeper concern. It's more about whether this is truly the right path for me now. I've already had my career, my moment. Perhaps this opportunity should go to someone younger. Who could possibly be more qualified? Sophia demanded. They came to you for a reason. There's something else you're not telling us, Claire said, studying her mother's face with the insight that came from a lifetime of relationship. Eleanor nodded, impressed as always by her daughter's perceptiveness. The general mentioned that once the program is established, there might be opportunities for Sophia as well. Understanding dawned on Claire's face. And you're worried about the appearance of nepotism. I don't want any doors open for me that I haven't earned, Sophia said firmly, surprising both her mother and grandmother with her conviction. If I'm going to succeed in aviation, it needs to be on my own merits. Eleanor felt a surge of pride at her granddaughter's words. That's exactly what I would have said at your age. But, Sophia continued, that doesn't mean you should turn down this opportunity. You've earned it through decades of work that most people never even knew about. If they want to finally recognize your contributions, you should let them. Claire reached over and took her mother's hand. For years you kept your light hidden for the sake of others, for Dad, for our family harmony, for all those male egos. In the military. Maybe it's time to finally let it shine fully. Eleanor squeezed her daughter's hand, moved by the insight. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, Claire replied with a smile. The conversation continued well into the evening, exploring angles and considerations that helped Eleanor clarify her own thinking. By the time Claire and Sophia left, she had made her decision. 3 days later, Eleanor found herself back at the academy, sitting across from General Holloway in Thomas Reynolds' office. I'm prepared to accept the position, she told them, with 2 conditions. The general raised an eyebrow. Which are? First, I want complete autonomy in developing the training methodology. No interference from existing protocols or bureaucratic requirements. General Holloway nodded. Agreed. That's precisely why we want you to break free from conventional approaches. Second, Eleanor continued, any future consideration of my granddaughter Sophia Mitchell for positions within the program must go through a blind evaluation process, with her application assessed by personnel who have no knowledge of her relationship. To me, Reynolds and the general exchanged glances, and then Holloway smiled. I expected nothing less from you, Colonel. Both conditions are acceptable. The news of Eleanor's appointment spread quickly through aviation circles. The official announcement from the Department of Defense generated media interest far beyond what Eleanor had anticipated. Suddenly, she was being requested for interviews by major networks and publications, her story positioned as an inspiring example of expertise, recognized regardless of age or gender. You've become something of an icon, Reynolds told her a week after the announcement, showing her a social media post where a group of young female pilots had created a tribute video showcasing their own simulator runs modeled after her techniques. That wasn't my intention, Eleanor replied, somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. Few iconic figures set out with that goal, Reynolds observed. It happens because they embody something others need to see proof that barriers can be broken, that excellence transcends categories. Before departing for Edwards Air Force Base to begin setting up the new program, Eleanor had one more commitment at the academy, a final training session with her most advanced students, including Sophia. The session had been scheduled for months, long before the government offer, and Eleanor had insisted on honoring it despite the demands of her new position. It would serve as both culmination and transition, a chance to share her most advanced insights before moving to her expanded role. The morning of the session, Eleanor arrived early to find the simulator room already occupied. Through the observation window, she could see Martin sitting in the instructor's position, working with Sophia on what appeared to be approach vectors for a difficult landing scenario. Eleanor watched silently, not wanting to interrupt. Martin's instruction was technically sound, his manner patient and encouraging as Sophia worked through the challenge. This was a side of him Eleanor had never witnessed before. No posturing, no need to assert dominance, just a genuine focus on helping his daughter improve her skills. Eventually, Sophia completed the exercise successfully, and Martin's face broke into a proud smile that contained none of his former condescension. It was the simple pride of a parent witnessing their child's growth. Eleanor chose that moment to enter, and both Martin and Sophia looked up in surprise. "Don't stop on my account," Eleanor said. "That was excellent work, both of you." Martin appeared momentarily embarrassed at being caught in this unfamiliar role. "Just helping Sophia with some basics before your advanced session. Nothing special." "On the contrary," Eleanor disagreed. "What I just witnessed was exactly what effective instruction should be: supportive, precise, and focused on the student's growth rather than the instructor's ego." Martin seemed taken aback by the compliment. "I've been trying to learn from your example, successfully from what I can see." Eleanor set down her materials on a nearby table. "In fact, I'd like to ask a favor, Martin." "Of course," he replied, curiosity evident in his expression. "Would you consider co-instructing today's session with me? There are aspects of commercial aviation procedures where your experience would be valuable to these students." The invitation clearly stunned him. "You want me to teach alongside you?" "I do," Eleanor confirmed. "These pilots need to understand both military and commercial applications. Between us, we can give them a more comprehensive perspective." The session that followed became something neither Eleanor nor Martin could have imagined 6 months earlier, a collaborative effort where each contributed their unique expertise, creating a learning experience that the students later described as transformative. Martin's knowledge of commercial operations complemented Eleanor's tactical expertise perfectly, and to everyone's surprise, they established a natural rhythm of instruction that brought out the best in each other. At one point, during a particularly complex scenario involving emergency procedures, Martin deferred to Eleanor's experience without hesitation. "Colonel Mitchell's approach here is something you should all pay careful attention to," he told the students. "There's a reason her emergency response protocols became standard throughout the Air Force." The acknowledgement, genuine, respectful, and without a trace of his former resentment, marked a turning point that Eleanor recognized immediately. This wasn't just Martin being polite or strategic. This was authentic recognition of her expertise from someone who had once been determined to diminish it. When the session concluded, the students crowded around both instructors with questions and comments. Eleanor noticed that Martin handled the attention differently than he would have in the past, no longer attempting to dominate the conversation, but genuinely engaging with each student's inquiries, and often directing the more advanced questions to Eleanor without prompting. As the students finally dispersed, Martin turned to Eleanor. "Thank you for that opportunity. It meant a great deal." "You earned it," she replied simply. "Your instruction today was excellent." An awkward silence fell between them, filled with the weight of their complicated history and the remarkable change in their dynamic. Finally, Martin spoke. "I've been meaning to tell you, I'm proud of your new position. The work you'll be doing is important. Thank you, Martin. And I want you to know," he continued, some of his old confidence returning but now tempered with humility, That I'll make sure Sophia has the support she needs while you're in California. No pressure, no expectations, just encouragement to find her own path. Eleanor studied him for a moment, seeing sincerity in his expression that would have been unthinkable a year ago. I believe you will, she said. She's lucky to have parents who understand both the technical and human aspects of becoming a pilot. Later that afternoon, as Eleanor was completing paperwork in her small office at the academy, there was a knock at the door. She looked up to find Thomas Reynolds standing there, holding what appeared to be an antique leather flight jacket. A moment of your time? He asked. Of course, Eleanor gestured to the chair across from her desk. What's on your mind? Reynolds carefully placed the jacket on the desk between them. This belonged to my father, he explained. He flew P-51s in the Pacific during World War II. It's been in my family for 3 generations. Eleanor recognized the significance of such an heirloom. It's beautiful craftsmanship. I'd like you to have it, Reynolds said. Eleanor looked up in surprise. Thomas, I couldn't possibly. Please, he interrupted gently. My father always said that true aviators understand something most people never grasp, that the sky doesn't care about your background, your gender, your age, or your connections. It only respects skill, judgment, and courage. He pushed the jacket toward her. You embody those qualities more than anyone I've ever known. Deeply moved, Eleanor ran her fingers over the worn leather, feeling the history it contained. I'm honored, she said simply, knowing that any more elaborate response would be unnecessary between 2 people who shared the deep bond of aviation. As the sun set on her final day at Skyward Aviation Academy, Eleanor stood on the observation deck overlooking the runway, watching the formation of training aircraft practicing touch-and-go landings. She was wearing Reynolds' gift, the vintage flight jacket that somehow felt as though it had been waiting for her all along. The next chapter of her life would begin tomorrow, with a level of recognition and responsibility she had never sought, but now embraced fully. Not for her own glory, but for the doors it would open for generations of pilots to come pilots, who would never have to hide their light or diminish their expertise to accommodate others' insecurities. Sophia joined her at the railing, silently, watching the aircraft for several minutes before speaking. I've been thinking about what you said in our first real training session, she said finally. About how flying isn't about proving anything to anyone else. It's about proving to yourself that you can meet each challenge with precision and calm. Eleanor nodded. The most important cockpit instrument is the pilot's own mind. I'm going to miss your teaching, Sophia admitted. I'll always be your grandmother first, instructor second, Eleanor assured her. That won't change with distance. I know. Sophia hesitated, then continued. But I've decided something. I'm going to earn my way into your program, not as your granddaughter, but as a pilot who deserves to be there. Eleanor smiled, recognizing the determination that mirrored her own at that age. I have no doubt you will. As darkness fell, and the runway lights came on, casting long beams across the tarmac, Eleanor reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. From being dismissed and underestimated to standing on the threshold of the most significant professional opportunity of her life, all because she had refused to shrink herself to accommodate others' expectations. The sky, as Thomas Reynolds' father had said, didn't care about age or gender. It respected only skill, judgment, and courage. And tomorrow, Eleanor Mitchell would once again take her rightful place among those who understood that timeless truth, not as an elderly woman who had surprised everyone with hidden talents, but as Colonel Mitchell, whose expertise and vision would help shape the future of flight. 1 year into the Joint Aviation and Space Tactical Training Initiative, known informally as JASTI, Eleanor Mitchell stood in the control room at Edwards Air Force Base, watching as the latest class of test pilots prepared for their final evaluation. Through the reinforced glass, she could see 6 pilots in advanced flight, suits completing their pre-flight checks in the simulator pods that had been custom-built to her specifications. "They look confident," observed General Holloway, who had flown in specifically to witness this graduation exercise. "They should be," Eleanor replied. "They've worked harder than any class I've ever instructed." The pilots represented the elite of military and civilian aviation, 3 from the Air Force, 1 from the Navy, 1 from NASA, and 1 from the commercial sector who had previously flown with the Blue Angels demonstration team. Each had been selected through the most rigorous evaluation process in aviation history, designed personally by Eleanor to identify not just technical skills, but the cognitive and emotional attributes essential for the next generation of experimental aircraft. "Are you going to tell them?" Holloway asked, glancing at Eleanor. She shook her head. "Not until after the exercise. I don't want it affecting their performance." What the pilots didn't know was that today's simulation wasn't merely a graduation requirement. It was the final determination of which 2 pilots would be selected for the first actual flight of the X-99 Peregrine, now fully operational and awaiting its maiden voyage. "Simulation commencing in 2 minutes, announced the technical director, a brilliant young woman named Dr. Fatima Ramirez, whom Eleanor had personally recruited from MIT. Eleanor moved to the central console, activating the communication system. "Attention pilots. Today's exercise will test everything you've learned in this program. You will be facing scenarios that push beyond the limits of conventional aircraft and conventional thinking. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and remember, in the upper atmosphere, between space and sky, there's no room for hesitation or doubt." She paused, looking at each pilot's face on the monitor screens. "Your objective is simple. Complete the mission and bring your aircraft home safely. How you accomplish that objective is entirely up to you. The simulation begins now." For the next 90 minutes, Eleanor and the evaluation team watched as the pilots navigated a series of increasingly challenging scenarios. The simulation took them from conventional flight environments to the edges of the atmosphere, testing their responses to equipment failures, unexpected adversaries, and physical conditions no human had actually experienced. Eleanor had designed the program to be unwinnable by conventional standards. There was no perfect solution, no textbook approach that would guarantee success. Instead, she was looking for something more fundamental: the capacity to adapt, to think beyond training, to make impossible choices under impossible pressure. As the exercise concluded, the pilots emerged from their simulator pods, faces flushed with the intensity of the experience. They gathered in the debriefing room, where Eleanor joined them, accompanied by General Holloway and Dr. Ramirez. "Before we discuss your performance," Eleanor began, "I want to share something with you that we've kept confidential until now." She nodded to Dr. Ramirez, who activated a large screen on the wall. It displayed an image of the X-99 Peregrine, now removed from its protective covering and gleaming under the lights of a secure hangar. "The Peregrine is no longer just a development project," Eleanor continued. "It's operational, and its first test flight is scheduled for 3 weeks from today." The room went completely still as the implications of this announcement sank in. "2 pilots from this class will be selected for that mission," General Holloway added, "based on your performance in today's exercise and throughout the program." Eleanor watched their reactions carefully. This was part of the evaluation too, how they responded to the sudden revelation that they were competing for perhaps the most coveted assignment in aviation history. "The decisions have already been made," she said, "based on criteria that go beyond technical proficiency. We've been looking for pilots who can think in dimensions that haven't been explored yet." She opened a sealed envelope and read the names: Major Sarah Chun and Commander Marcus Jackson. Chun, a brilliant Air Force pilot with a background in quantum physics, showed only a slight widening of her eyes to betray her excitement. Jackson, the Navy pilot who had come to the program with a reputation for unconventional approaches to tactical problems, nodded solemnly, the responsibility of the assignment evident in his expression. "The rest of you will form the critical support and backup team," Eleanor continued. "This is not a competition that ends with 2 winners and 4 losers. It's the beginning of a new chapter in aviation that will require all of your talents." After the briefing, as the pilots filed out to continue their preparations, General Holloway turned to Eleanor. "You've accomplished something remarkable. Here, Colonel. This program has exceeded every expectation we had when we brought you on board." "The real test is still ahead," Eleanor replied, ever mindful of the immense challenges the Peregrine program faced. "These pilots will be venturing into territory no one has navigated before." "With the best possible preparation," Holloway countered. "Thanks to you." Later that evening, Eleanor sat alone in her office, reviewing the data from the day's simulation. The base had grown quiet, most personnel having departed hours ago, leaving only the essential overnight staff and the persistent desert wind that whistled around the corners of the buildings. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. She looked up to find Dr. Ramirez standing there, holding a tablet. "I thought you'd want to see this right away," Fatima said, placing the tablet on Eleanor's desk. "The final analysis of the physiological data from today's simulation." Eleanor studied the charts and graphs, her eyes narrowing as she focused on a particular pattern. Chun's neural response during the stratospheric failure sequence. "It's unlike anything we've seen before." Fatima nodded eagerly. "Exactly. While everyone else showed increasing stress markers, her brain activity shifted to what we might call a flow state. She wasn't just managing the crisis, she was integrating with it." "This is what I've been looking for," Eleanor said quietly. "The capacity to transcend training and her a different relationship with the aircraft and environment." She looked up at the younger woman. "This validates our entire approach." "Your approach," Fatima corrected with admiration. "The neural integration protocols you developed have fundamentally changed how we understand pilot cognition under extreme conditions." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I just gave structure to what I experienced myself years ago. In those moments, when the aircraft stops being a machine you're controlling and becomes an extension of your own body and mind. The difference is you've made that experience teachable," Fatima pointed out. "That's what makes this program revolutionary." After Fatima left, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. From that day at Skyward Aviation Academy, when she had been dismissed as an elderly hobbyist, to now leading the most advanced aviation program in history, the trajectory seemed almost unbelievable. Her phone chimed with an incoming video call. She smiled when she saw the caller ID. "Sophia, Grandma." Her granddaughter's face appeared on the screen, beaming with excitement. "I just heard. I've been accepted for the next JASTI evaluation cycle." Eleanor felt a surge of pride, carefully tempered with professional detachment. True to her principles, she had recused herself entirely from Sophia's application process, insisting that her granddaughter be evaluated solely on her merits by personnel who had no knowledge of their relationship. "Congratulations," she said warmly. "That's a significant achievement. The selection committee only takes the top 2% of applicants." "I know," Sophia replied, her face flushed with excitement. "Dad actually cried when I told him. Real tears, Grandma." "From Dad?" Eleanor laughed, picturing Martin's reaction. "He's come a long way." "He has," Sophia agreed, her expression growing more serious. "He told me something interesting today. Said that watching you this past year has taught him more about leadership than all his executive training seminars combined." "How so?" Eleanor asked, genuinely curious. "He said you showed him that real authority doesn't come from position or title, it comes from mastery and generosity. That you never had to demand respect because you earned it by helping others become their best selves." Eleanor was momentarily speechless, moved by the profound change in the man who had once been so determined to diminish her. "That's quite an insight," she managed finally. "He's different now," Sophia continued. "At work, at home, everywhere. Mom says she feels like she's married to a new man. He actually listens to people instead of just waiting for his turn to talk." Their conversation shifted to Sophia's preparation for the upcoming evaluation cycle, with Eleanor careful to provide only the same guidance available to any candidate, no special insights, no insider information. Her granddaughter wouldn't want it anyway, Eleanor knew. Sophia was determined to earn her place entirely on her own merits. As they said their goodbyes, Sophia paused. "Oh, I almost forgot. There's a documentary crew that's been trying to reach you. Something about pioneers of the sky, women who changed aviation. Mom gave them your official contact at the base." "I've received their inquiry," Eleanor acknowledged. "I'm still considering it." "You should do it," Sophia urged. "There are so many young women who need to hear your story." After ending the call, Eleanor returned to her work, but Sophia's words lingered in her mind. Throughout her career, she had focused on competence rather than recognition, on excellence rather than visibility. The idea of becoming a public figure, a symbol for others, still felt foreign to her natural reticence. 3 weeks later, Eleanor stood in the secure control center at Edwards, surrounded by the elite team that would monitor the Peregrine's first flight. Behind reinforced glass, the sleek aircraft sat on the runway, its revolutionary design catching the early morning sunlight. Major Chun and Commander Jackson had already completed their pre-flight checks and were seated in the aircraft's advanced cockpit. Eleanor had spent countless hours with them in final preparations, drilling emergency procedures and discussing the test flight protocols in exhaustive detail. Now, as the moment of truth approached, she felt the familiar combination of excitement and anxiety that accompanied any test. Flight magnified by the unprecedented nature of this particular aircraft and her personal investment in the pilots. Preparation. "Peregrine, this is Control," she spoke into her headset. "Final authorization for launch sequence." "Roger, Control," Chun's calm voice replied. "We are green across all systems and ready for launch authorization." Eleanor took a deep breath. "You are cleared for takeoff, Peregrine." "Godspeed." The aircraft began to move, accelerating with astonishing rapidity down the runway before lifting into the clear desert sky with a grace that belied its revolutionary capabilities. The control room remained hushed as the Peregrine climbed, everyone acutely aware that they were witnessing aviation history in the making. "Passing 30,000 feet, Jackson reported. "All systems nominal. Preparing for Phase 2 acceleration." "Acknowledged, Peregrine," Eleanor responded. "You are cleared for Phase 2. What happened next astonished even those who had helped design the aircraft. The Peregrine seemed to leap forward, its advanced propulsion system engaging to propel it to speeds that would have torn conventional aircraft apart. On the tracking screens, its ascent curve steepened dramatically. Mach 4, Mach 5, Mach 6. Dr. Ramirez called out the readings in an increasingly awed voice. "They've reached transition altitude. Preparing for near-space maneuverability. Test." For the next 45 minutes, Chun and Jackson put the Peregrine through a series of maneuvers that redefined what was possible in atmospheric flight. The aircraft responded with a precision and capability that validated years of theoretical work and Eleanor's innovative training approaches. "Beginning descent sequence," Chun announced eventually. "Preparing for conventional landing approach." This was perhaps the most critical phase, transitioning from hypersonic flight to the relatively pedestrian speeds required for landing. Eleanor leaned forward, intensely focused on the telemetry data streaming across her screens. "Control to Peregrine," she said. "Remember your training. Let the aircraft find its natural descent profile. Don't force it." "Roger that," Shen replied, her voice betraying no tension despite the enormity of the challenge. The Peregrine's descent was as flawless as its ascent had been, the aircraft responding to the pilot's commands with precision that seemed almost sentient. As it touched down on the runway with barely a tremor, spontaneous applause erupted in the control room. Eleanor remained focused, waiting until the aircraft had completely stopped and the shutdown sequence was initiated before allowing herself to acknowledge the success. "Peregrine, this is Control. Excellent work. Welcome back to Earth." Hours later, after the debriefing sessions and preliminary data analysis were complete, Eleanor found herself standing alone beside the Peregrine in its secure hangar. The aircraft rested silently, its surface still warm from the incredible journey it had undertaken. She placed her hand on its sleek fuselage, feeling a connection to this machine that represented the culmination of principles she had helped pioneer throughout her career. In many ways, the Peregrine embodied her own journey underestimated, revolutionary, ultimately vindicated by performance rather than perception. "Saying goodbye?" came General Holloway's voice from behind her. Eleanor turned. "Not goodbye. Just a moment of appreciation. Today was more than a successful test flight," Holloway said, joining her beside the aircraft. "It was validation of an entirely new approach to aviation training, your approach." Eleanor nodded, accepting the assessment without false modesty. The neural integration techniques worked exactly as we hoped. Chun and Jackson weren't just flying the aircraft, they were becoming one with it. The implications go far beyond military applications, Holloway continued. Space exploration, disaster response, medical evacuation in extreme environments. The potential applications of your methodology are virtually limitless. Which brings me to this, he added, removing an envelope from his uniform pocket and handing it to Eleanor. She opened it to find an official invitation to address the International Aerospace Congress in Geneva the following month, the most prestigious gathering in the aviation world. "They want you to deliver the keynote address," Holloway explained, "to share your vision for the future of flight and pilot training." Eleanor looked at the invitation, momentarily overwhelmed by the public recognition it represented. Throughout her career, she had worked in relative obscurity, her contributions known only to those directly involved in her projects. The idea of stepping onto the world stage was both exhilarating and terrifying. "You don't have to decide immediately," Holloway said, sensing her hesitation. "But I hope you'll accept. There are people across the globe who need to hear what you have to say, especially young women, who don't believe a place exists for them in aerospace." 1 month later, Eleanor stood at the podium in Geneva, facing an audience of thousands, the most accomplished and influential figures in global aviation and space exploration. Her speech had been prepared with characteristic precision, focusing on the technical innovations of the JASTI program and the future possibilities it represented. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, she set aside her prepared remarks and spoke from a deeper place. "I stand before you today not as a pioneer or an innovator, but as a witness to what becomes possible when we refuse to accept artificial limitations," she began. "My journey to this podium began over 60 years ago, when a young girl looked up at contrails in the sky and dared to believe she belonged there, despite everything her society told her." The hall grew silent as she continued, sharing not just the triumphs but the struggles. The doors closed because of her gender, the contributions minimized, the necessity of proving herself again and again throughout decades of service. "I tell you this not to highlight obstacles, but to emphasize possibility," she said. "Every time I was told what I couldn't do, I simply redirected my energy towards showing what I could do. Excellence has a voice that eventually cannot be denied, no matter how many try to silence it." She spoke of the Peregrine and its successful test flight, but more importantly, of the mindset that had made it possible, the integration of human potential with technological innovation, the transcendence of conventional boundaries, the courage to venture into unexplored realms of possibility. The future of flight isn't just about faster aircraft or more advanced systems, she concluded. It's about expanding our conception of what's possible when human potential is fully engaged. The real frontier isn't out there in the sky or space, it's within us, in our capacity to imagine and then create what has never existed before. The standing ovation that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes, an unprecedented response at the normally reserved conference. As Eleanor made her way from the stage, she was approached by a group of young female pilots and engineers, their faces alight with inspiration. "Colonel Mitchell," one of them said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, "your speech changed everything for me. I've been considering leaving aerospace because I felt I didn't belong. Now I know that I do." Similar encounters continued throughout the conference, women and men approaching Eleanor to share how her words had affected them, how her journey had inspired them to reconsider their own limitations and possibilities. On the final evening, at a gala reception, Eleanor found herself speaking with the director of the European Space Agency, who expressed interest in adapting her training methodologies for their astronaut program. "Your approach to integrating cognitive science with physical training is revolutionary," he told her. "It could transform how we prepare humans for extended space missions." As they discussed potential collaboration, Eleanor caught sight of a familiar face across the room, Thomas Reynolds, who had flown in specifically for her keynote address. Excusing herself, she made her way through the crowd to greet him. "Thomas, I didn't know you were here." He smiled warmly. "I wouldn't have missed it for anything. Your speech was extraordinary, the talk of the entire conference." "Thank you for coming," she said, genuinely touched by his presence. "It means a great deal." "I brought something for you," Reynolds replied, handing her a small velvet box. Or rather, returned something. Eleanor opened it to find a set of vintage pilot wings, the kind awarded to the earliest female military aviators before standardized insignia were established. "These belong to my mother," Reynolds explained. "She was a WASP during World War II, one of the women who ferried military aircraft, but were denied official recognition for decades. She would have wanted you to have them." Eleanor stared at the wings, deeply moved by their significance and the connection they represented to generations of women who had fought for their place in the sky. "I'm honored," she said simply, knowing Reynolds would understand the depth of emotion behind those two words. As the conference concluded and Eleanor prepared to return to Edwards Air Force Base, she received news that the documentary about women in aviation had been completed, with her story as its centerpiece. The producers had sent an advance copy for her approval before its global release. Sitting alone in her hotel room, Eleanor watched the film with a mixture of pride and humility. It traced her journey from a young woman fighting for basic acceptance to her current position, directing the most advanced aviation program in history. Through interviews with colleagues, former students, and family members, it painted a portrait not just of professional achievement, but of a life dedicated to excellence and integrity. What moved her most was a segment featuring young female pilots from around the world, each describing how learning about Eleanor's career had affected their own aspirations and sense of possibility. "Colonel Mitchell showed me that age and gender are irrelevant when measured against skill and courage," said a 22-year-old Indian pilot who had recently become the youngest person to fly solo around the world. "She is the embodiment of aviation's true spirit, that the sky belongs to those brave enough to claim it, regardless of who they are or where they come from." As the credits rolled, Eleanor sat in silence, contemplating the extraordinary turn her life had taken in the span of just 18 months. From a retired pilot whose accomplishments had been largely forgotten to a global symbol of possibility and perseverance. Her phone chimed with a message from Sophia, just landed at Edwards. "Reporting for JASTI evaluation tomorrow at 0800. Nervous but ready. Thank you for showing me what's possible, Grandma." Love you. Eleanor smiled, typing her reply. The sky has been waiting for you. Trust yourself as much as I trust you. Love. Always. She set down her phone and walked to the window, gazing up at the night sky above Geneva. Stars glittered against the velvet darkness, eternal and unchanging, yet always offering new paths to those bold enough to navigate by them. Tomorrow she would return to Edwards, to the Peregrine program, to the work that continued to challenge and fulfill her even at 71 years of age. But tonight, she allowed herself a moment to simply appreciate the journey, from that first dismissive laughter at Skyward Aviation Academy to the standing ovation in Geneva. In the end, she had never needed to convince others of her worth. She had simply continued to fly her own course with precision and purpose, allowing her actions to speak with an eloquence that eventually could not be denied. And in doing so, she had opened contrails for countless others to follow, not just into the sky, but into the fullness of their own potential.